This is Nick Nelson, the mad scientist of muscle, and what I've got for today here is a pretty comprehensive training equipment review of this power rack from Feierdun Fitness, the FLA01 Power Rack. Now, this is basically a straight up free weight power rack with a couple of cable attachments on either side of these posts here. So it basically takes the concept of a regular power rack and extends it by allowing you to do cable exercises such as, for example, cable crossovers, cable flies, that kind of thing. Cable shoulder press is another good one. But what they've done here is basically take the normal frame of a rack and added cable attachments onto it. Now, how they go about this is something I'm going to get into here, as well as all the different and various features that you're going to find on this rack. Right, so since this is basically a power rack, and that's exactly what this whole thing is based on, I'm going to give you kind of a tour and a rundown on the features of it as a power rack first, and then we'll get into the other features like the cable stations and rogue stations and stuff like that. So, in terms of being a power rack, it's got good adjustability, it's nice and strong, and the capacity, I believe they say it's about 800 pounds. I think it could probably hold more. I wouldn't hesitate to put like 1,000 on here, and I think it would be just fine. Now, the rails, the system, you don't have a pin that you pull all the way out or a thing that slides up. I'll give you a close-up on what that looks like here. So these have these posts right here. You slide them in like this and then you rotate them down. This is looking like a pretty standard feature on most racks these days, especially home gym racks. It does make it easier to switch these rails. You don't need to slide it all the way out. You also aren't limited by sliding it up and down. So essentially, like I said, this comes here, slide it across, swing it down. These are very solid. Like I said, they could probably hold 800 to 1,000 pounds without any issues. I haven't tested with that kind of weight because most of the people who are going to use that kind of weight are probably training in commercial powerlifting gyms anyways. This is not something that you're probably going to be using 800 to 1,000 pounds on just as a recreational home gym trainer. Now, this bar is my own. It doesn't come with a bar, but it also comes with a set of J-hooks. You know, same kind of idea where you turn it sideways and then line it, spin it around. Again, a pretty standard feature on most racks these days, especially home gym ones. It also comes with these longer safety spotter arm bars, which I quite like. Now, these rack rails go all the way from vertical post to vertical post. These are good for using outside the rack. For example, if you want to do like a standing shoulder press, potentially you don't want the bar, if you're tall enough, you don't want the bar to be hitting here. You can put those things here, you can take it off of the rack here and press all the way up, and you're not going to hit the top of the rack. So, having this option, I quite like that. Now, we've got J-hooks, we've got the spotter arms, we've got the rails. Those are the basics of your power rack. Now, in terms of size, this is the next thing I want to get into. This distance right here, it's enough to do a good set of exercises like squats. You can basically step back, take one step back, and boom, you're doing squats. You can't take a lot of steps back, so it's not a super wide rack, which is fine because that's actually a good thing if you are space limited in your home gym, like your garage, your basement, or what have you. You don't want to take up a huge footprint. So this could potentially go out another foot or so, and it would take up a lot more space, and it may not be as useful for you in your own situation. So size-wise, nothing wrong with this. Height-wise, this gives you enough room on here to have your own chin-up bars. So like you can see on here, you got the angled bars, you've got these horizontal bars. You can do any sort of this. You can do neutral here. You got all kinds of options. Just like a lot of home gym racks do have that chin-up multi-station type of crossbeam on there. I like it. I think it's a really good way to kind of expand the horizons as far as what's available for exercises for you to do in the power rack. So that's what this machine looks like as a rack. And before I get into basically the next phase of this review and talking about the different stations and features, I do want to address, which I think is actually a pretty substantial design issue that can be gotten around fairly easily with this rack. This is a weight post right here. This is for storing weights on. Nothing wrong with that in concept. However, let's take this here. Now suddenly, because of that, you can't use this setting on the rack. You can't use this setting on the rack. You can't use this. Maybe you can, but we'll see. That stops it right there. This rail, this weight post right here, and there's one on the other side, essentially takes away these three settings on your safety rails, which personally, I don't think that's a great idea. I think that's a design flaw. I'll show you how you can get around it very easily, which is basically you unscrew these things and you don't use them. That's essentially the solution. What I'll show you here, however, is if you don't have plate storage, let's move this over, spin this around, boom. There's your plate storage right there. So you actually have a good amount of plate storage here, separate from the actual rack, which honestly, I'm not sure why they even included these posts, because you've got these posts right here and you can store a good amount of plates on here, and these aren't really necessary. So now we're going to talk about the biggest secondary feature of this rack, which is the cable system. Now, what I like about this is it's not just one pulley. It's not just a high-low. It's two adjustable pulleys where you can set this here, you can set them high, you can set them up this high, you can go all the way down, set it right down at the very bottom. That adjustability is very important, and it's actually an excellent feature of this type of rack. So, they slide up and down very easily. They've got a nice steel cap on here, so this is not going to damage that ball. This ball is not going to get lost up here. It's a very nice setup. In terms of loading, there's no two separate stacks on this one. It is just one loadable plate stack and plate trolley right here. So when you're doing the exercise, instead of just loading one side here or loading one side here, if you were going to do cable crossovers, you really only need to load one section here. So that's an advantage. If you have a two-stack pulley system and you're trying to do flies, you have to load equally on both sides. So you need essentially double the plates. Because of this being just one stack, you just need the one set of plates loading one time. You're not loading, if you're trying to load 50 pounds here, 50 pounds here, you're not loading a bunch of plates here, a bunch of plates there. You're loading this one thing, and the way it's anchored means when you're doing one at a time, it's basically half the weight. When you're doing both at a time, both at the same time, you're getting the entire weight. So it's actually a very elegant system in terms of design for cables. This one runs right here and then goes across top, up and down. I mean, if you get it, you'll see what I mean. The actual design is not important, but the functionality is. And it's a very functional cable stack, not only for single arm or single side cable exercises, such as seated cable rows or pull downs. It is very good for dual arm stuff. Like I said, for example, like a cable fly, cable crossover. You can put both of these down a little bit. Set them kind of in the middle. And then you've got cable shoulder press. And you can do it standing, kneeling, that kind of thing. Now, one of the disadvantages of just having a pulley is if you're going to be doing a pull down, and I'll show you this with a pull down bar, which they do include in here. It's not like a really, the pull down bar is not their focus, I should say, when they're designing. It's a very basic, steel bar. So don't get too excited about the included pull down bar. It's functional and it works, but you're probably going to want to actually get something that's a little more well designed than that. So when you're doing pull down, you're going to want to do them kneeling, just like that. Now, if you're tall, you won't be able to get a full stretch at the top, so you're going to need to either squat down or do them seated. But that's not a big deal. That's not the end of the world if you had to kind of sit down when you're doing this exercise. This is, again, kind of a standard thing when you're using this kind of cable stack. You're never going to really start from way the heck up here. You're going to start more like around forehead or 6 feet tall height, and that's going to require you to get lower in order to do the exercise. Now, in terms of pulley training, this basically opens up pretty much every type of pulley exercise you can think of. Like I showed you the pull downs, you can do with the included rope here, you can do a push down, just like so. Literally any kind of cable / pulley exercise you can think of, you're going to be able to do with this. Now, unclip that, clip the handle back on. Now, this is a good little handle. This is solid plastic right here. It's not a solid steel handle, but it's going to be more than enough for what you want to do with this kind of thing. So you can use this. I'll set this up a little bit higher. And you can see these things move very easily, but you can essentially turn this into a cable crossover machine very easily. And it functions very well. It's not direct lateral resistance, like say if you had a cable crossover machine and you're standing directly in the middle of it and you're getting direct inwards resistance, direct horizontal resistance. You're not really getting that here. You're kind of getting forward and in. That's not a big deal. It's still going to give you a good contraction in the chest, and you can step back and do a partial range of motion and really just focus on that peak contraction. So what you're going to kind of lose in distance here and direct line of pull inwards, you're going to make up for in a smaller footprint. That's not going to take up as much space as an entire giant cable crossover setup, which I do have in my basement, and it takes up about 15 feet of space. And this does not, so that's an advantage. All right, so getting into some of the alternative stations that are attached to this rack, for example, the seated cable row, what you've got here is basically a couple of foot plates, and on the same station, this hook right here, and I'll do a close-up on that too, that's for attaching battle ropes to. Now, in the setup here, I'm a little bit cramped in my basement gym. I do have a battle rope, but no real way to basically use it in where I've got this rack set up. So I'm not going to demonstrate that in particular, but this hook right here, and I will do a close-up on that, show you right in there, right here, allows you to very easily hook a battle rope. Now, when you're doing a seated cable row, this is nice and solid. They do move a little bit, but when you push on them, there's no give that way, which is really the important thing with the seated cable row. It doesn't matter if they move this way. That's not really a concern when you're doing seated cable rows, but you want to be able to push with your legs, lock your body in, and perform the exercise. And I've just grabbed both the cable crossover handles and attached them on here. You can use a straight bar, you can use whatever attachments that you feel comfortable with for doing rows. Now, low pulley rows, because this is adjustable in height, set it up, change the angle, and do a little bit higher on the rows. So this is one of the things I like about adjustable height pulleys like this, is it gives you more options to find a comfortable path and unique path when you're doing exercises like this. So, you've got a 45-degree angle here. You can get on here and very easily raise it up and go even higher. Now, one thing you'll probably notice is when you're moving these cables up and down, you can't have those safety rails on. So, this is on here, say this is right here. Boom. That's going to hit it. I wouldn't consider that a design flaw, but it is something to be aware of when you're using the machine. I mean, it's clearly, move that up, take it off. To me, that's not a design flaw. That's just how the thing has to be in order to use it. So when you're using something like this, I would actually recommend you move both of these right to the top, get them right out of the way. Then you can set this thing at whatever level you want when you're doing free weight stuff. And at some point here, I will actually show you a few things that I did with free weight with these two cables attached that I found to be really, really effective, specifically for bench press, shoulder press, that kind of thing. You can actually loop these cable handles around the end of the bar and put weight on. So you're getting cable resistance or cable assistance while you're doing a barbell exercise. It's actually a really cool way to do it. And you have to have a rack like this in order to actually do something like that. So I will be demonstrating that at some point here in the very near future, separate from this review, because that's not really a core feature of this rack. That's just some crazy stuff that I come up with when I get something like this and I like to play with it and make up some cool stuff with. So on both sides of the bottom cross beams here, these bottom side beams I should say, on the rack, you've got 3 band pegs. Now these are very useful for attaching bands to when you're doing band training, which is why they call them band pegs. Now what I like about these particular pegs is they actually have a lip on the end here. So some pegs that I've used are just straight pegs, and there is a greater chance of the bands kind of sliding off, especially when you're coming to the bottom and you get some slack in the band. With this, because there's the lip there, there's definitely a reduced chance of these bands sliding off. It does make them more secure on there, which I think is a nice feature. It's really a highly optional feature. You may or may not care about having band pegs. They're nice to have if you ever want to get into some band training though. And these are good pegs for that purpose. So the next station I want to focus on is the Landmine Attachment. Now, what I've got here is the bar slid right into the sleeve here. This is the Olympic sized attachment. It also has a standard size attachment on top. So it's kind of like a double barrel option. So long standard barbells are not as common as Olympic sized standard barbells sometimes, but if you have either one of those, you're going to be able to use this. So standard size, Olympic size, you're good to go. Now, one thing I do like about this that I've noticed in some other racks with Landmine attachments is this gives you actually a true 360-degree range of motion. It's not going to stop the movement, it's not going to flip over, it's not going to basically limit you or hamper you in any way. So this stays upright, you can move it around, shift it around, you know, basically do everything a Landmine is supposed to do. No problems there at all. Now, they do come with a Landmine rowing attachment, which you basically just slide on here, tighten up the screw on there, put a plate on, and you got yourself a T-bar row. So whether you have the handle on this side or on this side, doesn't really matter. Weight's not going to slide off because it's at an angle here. So you're basically just taking this and you're doing T-bar rows, just like with any Landmine attachment. It's a nice attachment and very smooth functioning, and like I said, it gives you basically full range of motion without any hitches or stoppages or glitches anywhere in that. So the next feature I want to get into is the set of dipping handles that comes with this rack. Now, it's a very elegant design. Essentially, it's the same kind of setup, the same kind of attachment as the safety rails, as the J-hooks, as the spotter arm. It's the one post, and this is going to swing down once you put it in. And boom, put them on both sides and you got your dipping bars. Now, if you want to dip inside the rack, doesn't matter, you can dip outside the rack, inside the rack, just switch the handles up. Now, the good thing about these dipping handles is that they're appropriately spaced. So these internal handles are actually set pretty well for dipping. Now, you're holding on to here, and this is just slightly outside of shoulder width. For me, that's pretty well ideal for doing dips. So set these for whatever height is appropriate for you. If you want to do body weight spotted dips, you can set these lower and actually kind of do like an inverted row type of dip where your feet are actually either on a bench or even on the ground, and this is going to allow you to fully adjust how much body weight you put on here, how high you want to set these. Now, it comes with 2 sets of handles. You can kind of see, I'll give you a close-up view on that. These are the dip handles. If you try and use these wide ones, I wish you the best of luck, because this is going to set your shoulders and your hands so wide that if you do a dip on here, it's going to mangle your shoulders. So don't do that. What you want to use these wide grips for is exercises like an inverted row, which I'll show you here. So you can get yourself situated under here. Now you've got a good, fairly wide but neutral grip for doing an inverted row. And you can also, of course, use the close grips for that inverted row as well, just like that. And if you want to do an overhand grip, your hands probably will fit in here, and it's almost like doing a fat grip inverted row. Well, because that's exactly what it is, essentially. So, you got overhand, you grip like that, you got underhand, that kind of thing. And because these are completely adjustable in height, you can set these high, you can set these all the way down, almost low, so you're doing that kind of, an inverted row basically with your feet up in the air on a bench, that kind of thing. Highly adjustable, and having these options here is fantastic, because I've used some dip machines and some dip handles and racks that weren't appropriately spaced. These ones are very easy to set up, very easy to use. All right, so we're coming towards the end of the features of this rack. Now, one of the things you're going to notice here is this little S-hook. There's 3 of them on each side. These are storage hooks. You take your cable attachment, hook it on the end. There's a little hole, 3 little holes that these go in. And those come in and out. If you don't need those to store stuff on, you don't have to have them in. It's one of those optional things that's going to give you a place to get stuff out of the way if you need it to be out of the way. If you don't, you can take those off, no problem. So, straight bar attachment, cambered pull down bar attachment, short little push down bar attachment, rope attachment, and a short length of chain in case you need to adjust cable length using a short length of chain. So if you're going to do any overhead barbell pressing, this is something you're going to want to do using those spotting arms outside the rack, because if you've got especially these storage hooks on either side and you're actually storing stuff, I think you have an idea what's probably going to happen. So this is going to happen. You're going to start hitting stuff. Using overhead stuff, you're going to have to either be seated or you're going to have to use the spotter arms outside the rack. So the final feature I want to get into here is something very simple, and that's just vertical barbell storage. Now for me, in my home gym basement, I have 8-foot ceilings and Olympic bars 7 feet. This is actually too high for me to safely get an Olympic bar into this sleeve. I'm going to put a hole in my ductwork if I try and do something like that. So easy curl bar, perfect for this. Gives you the option to store another barbell vertically. I'm just going to keep my other bar in the rack, which is fine for me. So now that I've gone through all the features of the rack and the different stations, I want to kind of talk about how easy this is to set up or how hard this is to set up. Now, when I was putting this together, I found it took me about 5 hours from start to finish, basically unwrapping everything, laying everything out, and making sure that I had all the parts. That actually, having all the parts, was one of the really nice features that I liked about this rack. What I'm going to show you here is this. This is basically cardboard with plastic wrap that lays out each exact step where you're going to need what. So, obviously these are all empty, but what you can see here, and I'll move in really close, step 6. When you go to the instruction manual, step 6, these actually match up. So you can tell exactly when you're going to need certain screws or nuts or bolts and how they're going to be used because they correspond to what you're going to read in the directions. This makes it very, very easy to know how to set this thing up. And I didn't find really any major issues as far as setting this up. I found it really easy to put this together. The only slight hitch that I found was when I was stringing the cables through. That could be better explained, but once I kind of looked at the diagram a bit more and kind of thought it through, I got the idea of how this is going to set up, and it wasn't that hard to figure out. So, maybe a few extra minutes. I had to basically make sure that these pieces were facing in the right direction, especially here because you want to be sure that they're facing in the appropriate direction so that these cables run down and up how they need to be, because if they're not, then this is not going to work properly. And this is well constructed as well. This is steel, metal pieces, There were no hitches on here. This track rolls up and down very smoothly, and it gives you a good range of motion in terms of how far this cable is going to stretch. So it gives you, you know, pretty much enough length of cable for anything you want to do. For example, like if you're doing an overhead tricep extension, sometimes I find when I'm doing those, which is, you know, leaning forward and doing that, in a shorter cable stack, I'll run out of cable and it'll actually contact and stop the movement. This, you got like 10 feet, so you're going to be just fine. So this is going to give you plenty of options. You can't, I guess one of the downsides of having the single rack here, the single cable, is you can't have two people doing cable exercises at the same time. If you've got two cable weight stacks, that's no problem because they're separate. This, if you're doing this and somebody's over here, you're moving the same weight stack, that's not going to be very good unless you're trying to, you know, potentially spot somebody by doing a push down here while they're doing a pull down there, which, you know, come to think of it, actually might not be a bad idea. So you can actually have a friend spotting you, not on your actual hands, but by actually moving the weight on the other side. So might be something I do a video on later, but maybe not. You would basically, you're using a home gym primarily because you're training alone, especially with a power rack setup. So if you're doing bench press with this rack, definitely set up these bottom safety rails, these ones that go all the way across, because you do not want to get trapped under a bar. That's the main function of having a safety rack and safety rails on a power rack. Nothing drives me more crazy when I see videos on Instagram, for example, where people are doing squats using these rails outside of the rack. They step out and they're freestanding doing squats, and suddenly they get pinned. And even if they've got a spotter, maybe they're not ditching the bar correctly, but they get stuck under these bars, the rack goes flying, the bar goes flying, and injuries happen. And potentially fatal injuries can happen, especially if you're doing a bench press and you get stuck under that bar. So definitely use those safety rails and make sure they're set just slightly below your chest level if you can. If your bench is adjustable in any way, try and make sure they adjust like that, but definitely use them because it's that important. You know, public safety announcement, use safety rails in a safety rack, which is the purpose you got this rack for, so I can't bash that into your head enough. Now, in terms of overall quality of construction on this rack, I think it's excellent. I think it's perfectly applicable for a home gym situation. I have no concerns at all about putting, you know, 300, 400, 500 pounds on this rack and being completely safe on here. If you're strong enough to start getting into the, you know, 700, 800, 900 plus kind of range for exercises, for example, like partials, stuff like that, that's when I might be a bit more concerned. But most of the time, 99.99999% of the, you know, people using this rack are never going to go to that kind of weight anyways, so I don't think it's even a concern. Everything here is built rock solid, multiple strong bolts on here. You know, is this going to shift around a little bit? Actually, no, it's not. This is actually really well built, and I found it to be very stable without any issues in terms of, you know, if I'm slamming the rack back on here, there's enough footprint on here that it's not going to tilt. Even though there's no weight, you know, there may not be much weight on here, because these things stick out more, they stick out that way, the feet stick out on this side, there's support outside of the rack. So you're not just having these posts end here, and I'll kind of tilt down and show you what I'm talking about. You know, you can see these posts on here, they stick out. They stick out there. That foot sticks out across there. So it's going to be very stable, and you're not going to tip this rack over unless you really try and take a run at it, which, you know, if you've got 600 pounds, you know, and you're doing something like that, and you're, you know, slamming that bar into there, maybe you'll have an issue. Even then, I don't think so. I think you'd be more likely to basically bounce back and have other problems than tipping this rack over. So it's, bottom line, it's very solid, it's very well built, and I have, like I said, no concerns about that. Definitely high quality construction. Now that I've kind of gone through everything about this rack, I kind of want to talk about the value you're getting for what you're getting here. At the time I'm doing this review, this rack setup, excluding the bar, which is my own bar, retails for $7.99, which for everything you're getting on here is actually an excellent value. This is something that's very high quality constructed and gives you a lot of training options. So pretty much anything you can do with free weight inside of a rack, you're going to be able to do in this rack, which opens up a wide variety of exercises with just a few adjustments here and there. So for example, if you're doing the overhead barbell stuff, you're going to want to take these off, or you're going to want to do it seated, or you're going to want to do it outside the rack. If you're doing bench press, make sure these posts are off, because I found for me, for my bench and my dimensions, that bottom safety rail should have been right where these posts are. So for me personally, I would lose those posts. Take those off, set them aside. You don't really need them. If you have more plates than you can fit on that thing, just buy yourself a separate plate tree and use that off to the side. That's going to be more functional than having this thing kind of in the way. And that's really the main downside and my main complaint with this rack are these plate storage bars, which luckily are completely, in my opinion, optional, and that's easy to remedy. Bottom line, excellent rack with a few small issues that I think are easily remedied, and nothing that I think should hold you up from buying this if you're interested in a really good quality rack for your home gym.